Not imposing unreasonable fines on Karen is what turned my house into a military fortress. Have you ever felt so unfairly controlled that someone forces you to follow unreasonable rules? What would you think if a neighbor suddenly built a barbed wire fence around your house just because you refused to pay unjust fines? Share your story under this video. It was a typical morning in a quiet neighborhood where every blade of grass was trimmed neatly, like soldiers standing in formation. The sky was high and clear, like a freshly polished glass, with not a single speck of dust in sight. The sparrows chirped cheerfully on the white fence, amidst the twisting bougainvillea flowers swaying in the wind, creating a sense of peace that almost felt surreal. This neighborhood wasn't just a place to live, it was a sealed box of order, control, and rules. Here, the grass could not exceed 4 centimeters in height. Trash bins had to be rolled out by exactly 6 a.m. every Monday, and absolutely no laundry could be hung in the backyard. Everything had to fit within the boundaries, or it would be corrected immediately. The front door creaked open softly, and Daniel stepped out onto the porch in his striped pajamas, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He yawned, his messy hair falling over his forehead. His eyes were still bleary, as if his brain was still trying to reconnect with reality. But then, what the hell is this? Daniel froze, eyes wide open, almost dropping his coffee. He stepped back, his heart racing as if someone had screamed in his ear. Right in front of him, where soft green grass had once led to the walkway, was now blocked by a barbed wire fence. The twisted metal wires, sharp like porcupine quills, stretched from the left corner to the right corner of the yard. Standing as tall as a person, the fence was a menacing declaration, a cold cut between two worlds. In the middle, hung a bright red sign with bold white letters. No entry, potential danger. Daniel stammered. No way. Is this real? And then, like a name etched into his memory, he muttered through clenched teeth. Karen. Just one word, one name, but it was enough to explain everything irrational. Karen, the lovely neighbor who always had a smile plastered on her face like a coat of nail polish that never peeled off. Blonde hair neatly styled, clothes never wrinkled, walking lightly as if even the earth had to make way for her. She didn't hold a position in the neighborhood council, but everyone knew. She was the one actually in charge, like a queen without a throne. At that moment, a sweet, sugary voice chimed in from behind him. Oh, Daniel, I see you've noticed the fence. Daniel spun around. The sunlight hit his eyes, making him squint, but it was the anger that made his eyes gleam. Karen stood there, on her lawn, holding a cup of chamomile tea, her eyes sparkling as if nothing in the world was wrong. What's with the fence, Karen? Daniel growled, each word punctuating the air. Did you just build a prison in front of my house? Karen shrugged lightly, as if he had asked something completely absurd. Oh, Daniel, there have been so many strangers passing by here lately. I just want to make sure everyone is safe, and of course, for you too. By taking over the land in front of my house? Oh no, I'm not taking over it. I'm protecting it. You should be thanking me. Daniel took a step forward, pointing at the glaring red sign. Protecting? Or threatening? Karen maintained her smile, but her eyes narrowed, sharp like a razor. Daniel, I sent an email about this 2 weeks ago. If you had bothered to read the neighborhood council's emails instead of watching cat videos, you'd know this was necessary. Daniel stared at her, his blood boiling. Karen, this is my house. You can't just do whatever you want and use for the community as an excuse. I'm suing. Karen chuckled softly and turned back to her porch. Oh, of course, you can try. But in the meantime, don't let anyone step over the fence. It's a dangerous area, after all. She turned back, the final smile cutting through like a knife. Have a nice morning, Daniel. The door to Karen's house closed, leaving Daniel standing in the morning sunlight, gripping his now cold cup of coffee, staring at the tall, cold iron fence. It felt like a hell wrapped in barbed wire. Daniel was trapped in his own living space. Every time he came or went, he had to squeeze through a small passage that Karen graciously allowed. No one helped him. The neighbors peered at him through their curtains, silent as though their silence would protect them from Karen's wrath. Something started shifting inside Daniel. It wasn't just the simmering anger, but a deeper feeling, the quiet pain of being stripped of the most basic right, to live as a human being in his own home. He stared at the barbed wire fence every morning and wondered, why am I tolerating this? Why are we all tolerating this? He couldn't stay silent anymore. Not anymore. 1 week later, before dawn, Daniel stood in front of Mr. Marcus's house, a former Marine veteran who had once been forced by Karen to pay a fine for hanging the national flag. 3 millimeters off. Knock, knock, knock. The door opened with a creak. Marcus squinted. Daniel, you're up earlier than the sun. What's going on? Daniel took a deep breath, his voice steady and determined. I need your help. I want to organize a community meeting. And I need witnesses, people who have suffered under Karen for too long. Marcus laughed hoarsely. Karen? She's a mini dictator. Back in my days fighting, I saw people like her, hiding behind rules to manipulate a whole community. All right, I'm in. From there, Daniel began knocking on doors. Liz, a retired teacher, sighed when she heard him. You know, I got fined just for planting lavender flowers while the neighborhood guide clearly says, prefer roses. Is lavender a crime now? I and his wife, a young Vietnamese couple, hesitated. We just put up a picture of a kitten on the living room window to make our daughter happy. And Karen sent us an official warning. She said the image was offensive and ruined the aesthetic. A single mother burst into tears as she recounted. I was banned from taking my son to the playground. Just because. His laughter was too loud. Who defines too loud? Daniel recorded everything. Testimonies, pictures, emails, audio files, fine notices. Each piece of evidence was a nail hammered into the wall that Karen had built to divide the neighborhood. He printed out a thick file, heavy as an undeniable truth. Sunday afternoon, a small stadium in the neighborhood became the meeting place. Plastic chairs were arranged in rows. Kids played at the edge of the field, adults whispered, exchanging glances. The golden sunlight filtered through the roof, but it wasn't enough to ease the growing tension. Karen arrived right on time, wearing a light blue dress, designer sunglasses, holding a matcha smoothie, her smile as thin as paper. She sat in the front row as if she already knew the outcome of the meeting. But this time, no one looked at her with fear. Daniel stood up. He wore a blue shirt, holding the heavy file. No microphone was needed. His voice rang out clearly in the still air. I'm not here to talk about the fence in front of my house. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. I'm here to talk about the invisible wall we've allowed one person to build around this entire community. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen raised an eyebrow, smirking, as if waiting for the farce to end. Daniel held up a stack of papers. This is a list of fines over the last 3 years. 78% of them come from one signature, Karen Miller. He paused again, then continued. And here's the evidence showing that most of these fines weren't based on official rules. He lowered the file, his voice deepening. We've stayed silent for too long. Not because we agree, but because we were afraid. But fear cannot build a community. It only creates a prison. A moment of silence. Then Mr. Marcus stood up, his voice sharp. I was forced to write an apology letter for walking my dog at the wrong time. I wrote it, but I never apologized. Next, Liz. I played classical music. Karen called the police. They came and said it was disturbing the peace. I was playing Beethoven, not death metal. A man in a baseball cap raised his hand. I got fined for hosting a birthday party for my daughter. In the backyard. Just because the laughter was too loud. One by one, then group by group, they stood up. Their voices joined together, no longer fragmented but like a choir. The anger that had been suppressed for so long burst forth. Karen stood up abruptly. Her hands shook, her eyes wavering. "You ungrateful people, I kept this place clean, peaceful. And this is how you repay me? With slander and lawsuits?" "I think," Daniel interrupted, not needing to shout, "without you, we might have been able to live like human beings." A round of applause erupted, not loud and chaotic, but firm and decisive. Karen fell silent. Her eyes scanned around, looking for support, but all she found were awakened gazes. The power structure she had built piece by piece began to crack. Building a good community isn't about erecting barbed wire fences. Mr. Marcus laughed out loud, his laughter ringing like a broken chain. People continued chatting, eating cake, kids running around freely on the now liberated lawn. But that joy was just the beginning of the end. The rest came from the court. 3 days later, Karen received an official summons from the city authorities. A class action lawsuit filed by the community with nearly 200 violations, including serious charges such as civil rights abuse, illegal interference with private property, and even causing psychological harm to children in the neighborhood. The local newspaper ran a mocking headline: "Fence Queen Convicted. Even the law won't allow self-appointed monarchies." And then, as usual, Karen refused to quietly step down. The next morning, at 7 a.m., she appeared at the city hall, not alone, but with a 6-lawyer team, dressed in black suits, pulling a rolling suitcase filled with documents as if preparing for an international trial. Local media wasn't invited, but Karen, as usual, hired a professional film crew. Cameras, microphones, lights, everything. She stood in the middle of the hall, speaking as if she were running for president. "I, Karen Miller, only do what's best for the community. I've stopped trash, noise, misconduct. And this is how people treat me? With slander and lawsuits?" She looked up at the sky, her voice soaring. "God will judge you all. I don't need your forgiveness. I have the truth on my side." One of the lawyers whispered, "Ms. Karen, we think it's better to lower the volume." But she didn't stop. She climbed the stairs of the hall like stepping onto a podium, holding up her rebuttal file. Then tripped because her heels were over 10 centimeters, just like Karen. The file scattered, papers flying everywhere, one page clearly printed. Fine reason: planting yellow chrysanthemums mixed with roses, disturbing the uniformity of the landscape. Outside, the people gathered, watching through the glass. Daniel crossed his arms, watching without gloating, just gently shaking his head. Marcus finished his pastry and muttered, "She should be a director. Dramatic in every step." Karen was suspended from her position on the neighborhood council while awaiting a ruling. The city council also opened an internal investigation. For the first time in many years, Karen was no longer allowed to speak on behalf of the neighborhood. 2 weeks later, after numerous hearings and hours of reviewing evidence from the community, the local civil court issued its official ruling for Karen Miller. In front of more than 50 residents from the neighborhood, those who had been fined for reasons as ridiculous as playing classical music, planting the wrong type of flowers, or hanging the flag slightly askew, the verdict was read out in solemn silence. Defendant Karen Miller is found guilty of abusing unofficial authority, illegally interfering with private property, and violating the personal freedoms of residents within the neighborhood. The court sentences the defendant to 180 hours of mandatory community service, including the dismantling, cleaning, and restoring areas where the defendant made erroneous decisions, under the supervision of an independent committee. Furthermore, the defendant is prohibited from holding any managerial or decision-making roles in community, residential, or council organizations for the next 5 years. A small gasp echoed from the back rows. Some applauded softly, but were quickly held back by those next to them. After all, it was still the court. Karen sat motionless. Her face was pale like a blank sheet of paper. Her lips were pressed so tightly they trembled. She turned to her legal team. Do something. I can't go pick up trash. I'm the one who set the standards for this place. The lead lawyer sighed, whispering, You can appeal, but the court has all the evidence, both images and collective testimony. The chances are slim. Karen slammed her hand on the table. So now I have to clean up Liz's dreadful lavender flower beds? And help fix Marcus's gate? Why not let me clean the Statue of Liberty too? The whole courtroom tried to hold in their laughter. The judge slammed the gavel to end the hearing. This sentence is not just to punish an individual, but to restore trust within the community. Control should never replace respect. And so, Karen had to face the consequences she deserved. The next day, Daniel sat on the porch, sipping his coffee, watching the evening sunlight filter through the trees. Marcus sat beside him, speaking softly. Do you think she'll change? Daniel paused. Probably not. But at least this time, the whole neighborhood has found its voice. A little girl with curly hair tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Uncle Daniel, can we play in your yard now? Daniel was surprised, then laughed. He turned to look at Karen, now walking quietly. Her shoulders slumped as if the last burden had finally fallen. Play as much as you like, kid, he said, turning back to the crowd. This neighborhood belongs to everyone. The crowd applauded. Someone turned on some light music. A peaceful afternoon, in the truest sense, had finally returned. Before the sunlight faded behind the houses, Daniel turned to Marcus, raising his lemonade. Karen, maybe you don't know. He raised an eyebrow, a half smile. But you can't build a good community by just putting up barbed wire fences. Marcus burst into hearty laughter, tapping Daniel on the shoulder. You're exactly what this neighborhood has been waiting for. Who do you think was right in this situation? Have you ever encountered unreasonable rules like this before? If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Crazy Neighbor Drama channel for more epic twists and turns.